Pomembno je, da si v življenju postavimo visoke cilje. Še pomembnejša pa je pot, kako jih dosežemo. Alma Mater Europaea izobražuje doma in v svetu zaposljive strokovnjake, izhaja iz človeka, dela za človeka. Zato so tudi njihovi študijski programi v službi ljudi, pod akademskim in institucionalnim pokroviteljstvom Evropske akademije znanosti in umetnosti. Alma Mater Europaea na vseh stopnjah bolonjskega študija razvija in sledi principom interdisciplinarnosti, transnacionalnosti in gradnji mostov.
Mi smo zelo zadovoljni, jaz upam tudi, da je Alma Mater zadovoljna z nami. Mislim, da je to predvsem pomembno. Mi smo ponosni na to, da smo z odločbo Ministrstva za zdravje učni zavod za številne profile izobraževanja.
Posebej pa sem navdušen nad visoko mednarodno vpetostjo Alme Matris, ki znatno presega povprečje v slovenskem visokošolskem prostoru.
Izhajamo iz človeka, delamo za človeka in torej v službi ljudi.
Evropske univerze vedno znova Alma Mater Europaea prepoznavajo kot resnega akademskega partnerja, ki sledi principom kakovosti, ki se utrjuje v konkurenci, relevanci, kar se dokazuje z zaposljivostjo, ter racionalnost pri izvedbi študijskih programov v dobro študentov in razvoju stroke. Z Alma Mater, pripravljeni za v svet.
Spoštovani gostje, dobrodošli v nadaljevanju 9. mednarodne znanstvene konference z naslovom Za človeka gre, digitalna transformacija v znanosti, izobraževanju in umetnosti organizacije Alme Mater Europaea, Evropskega centra Maribor in Evropske akademije znanosti in umetnosti. Ker gre za velik mednarodni dogodek, zdaj prehajam na uradni jezik te konference, to je angleščina. So welcome again. I switch now to the business language of this science conference. The 9th science conference with the title All About People, Digital Transformation in Science, Education and Arts, organized by Alma Mater Europaea, European Centre Maribor and the European Academy of Science and Arts under the patronage of the President of the Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Borut Pahor. Before we start with one of the highlights of this international conference, a panel discussion about sustainable development and digital transformation with a very special keynote speech and a very special keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Jeffery Sachs from the Columbia University in New York, I would like to give the floor to the organizer, the president of Alma Mater Europaea, European Centre Maribor, Professor Ludvik Toplak.
Wow.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to express welcome to all of you on behalf of Alma Mater Europaea, European Academy of Sciences and Arts and Organizing Committee. Dear Minister Andrej Šircelj, Slovenian Minister of Finance, Dear Director of Institute for Sustainable Development at the Columbia University, Professor Jeffery Sachs. Dear invited guests, Alojz Peterle, the first Premier Minister of Republic of Slovenia, Dr. Francej Arhar, first Governor of Bank of Slovenia, Dr. Boris Pleskovič, Chancellor of the First Government of Slovenia and President of Slovenian World Congress, Professor Laurence Hewick from Toronto, President of International Family Business Institute, and Professor Mejra Festić, Professor of Finance and Monetary Policy at the University of Maribor. Distinguished guests from over 40 countries, welcome to the conference all about people, digital transformation in science, education, and art. This evening plenary session is dedicated to examine sustainable development in correlation with the monetary policy during the period of digital transformation. Shortly, we will listen to the message of Professor Jeffery Sachs, our tonight keynote speaker. Our guests will later on discuss the financial and monetary policy in honor to the 30th anniversary of monetary sovereignty of Slovenia as essential part of transition. It is great honor to be able to reunite Professor Jeffery Sachs from the United States and the Chancellor of the First Government of Slovenia, Alojz Peterle, and other friends, creator of the State of Republic of Slovenia on this stage. This is the time to express our gratitude to his contribution to the monetary sovereignty of Slovenia as one of the key milestones for the monetary transition and transition in Slovenia. I would like to thank all speakers at this year's conference. There will be more than 330 speakers, scientists and academics from over 40 countries presenting their papers and in 12 sections over the next 8 working days. The motto, All About People, expresses the mission, the vision, and the activities of Alma Mater Europaea in various academic fields with the wish to contribute to the sustainable development and peace. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I wish you a successful conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Toplak. And now we proceed with the keynote speech when it comes to sustainable development and digital transformation. I'm really honored to announce one of the most prominent scholars in the world, Professor Jeffery David Sachs, an American economist, academic, public policy analyst, university professor at Columbia University in New York. Mr. Sachs is director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia and also president of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He's a sustainable development goals advocate for the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and he's also one of the world's leading experts on sustainable development, economic development, and of course the fight against poverty. And which is not so unimportant in this case, has a special relation to Slovenia. We heard due to his advisory role 3 decades ago. So Professor Sachs, welcome to Slovenia again, at least virtually. We would of course prefer to have you here, but of course you're in New York due to the present situation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. What a great pleasure to be with you, and what a great honor. Congratulations to Alma Mater Europaea for hosting this important gathering and for all of your intellectual leadership in Slovenia and in Europe and in the world. We admire you. And of course, I would rather be with you in beautiful Slovenia, one of the most beautiful places in the world and one of my favorite destinations. It hasn't been so long since my wife and I were in Bled a couple of years ago, just before actually the lockdown. We came for a security conference and of course enjoyed that most beautiful place in Slovenia. And it's very touching and heartwarming to be with you on the 30th anniversary of some adventures of your country, its independence in June 1991, and to see my dear friend Boris Pleskovič on the screen, who brought me to Ljubljana in that period to work with the Prime Minister Peterle. So how wonderful to see you, Prime Minister, on the occasion. I'd like to remember one other person as well, Janez Drnovšek, who was a great person, a tremendous gentleman, a very decent person who brought me to Federal Yugoslavia for the first time in 1989. When the crisis was already far advanced. And at the time, Drnovšek was president of the presidents of Yugoslavia and invited me to speak to the presidency of the country. And from there, he helped me to bond with Slovenia and to have the chance to join Prime Minister Peterle's leadership and to work alongside Boris Pleskovič and our colleagues on introducing the currency and the tolar. And I think one can say this was a successful undertaking in very dramatic circumstances, but Slovenia really rose to the occasion of independence and escape from the wars of the region. I was just looking at the data. In 1992, Slovenia was at 50% of the GDP per capita of Germany. Now it's 73% of the per capita income. That's a simple measure, but it shows a historic success over a 30-year period of continued technological advance, economic development, peace, and it's been a pretty challenging time, but I think it's a great success story of a beautiful country, and it's a life honor for me to be associated with that. Well, we're talking about going forward, and I think the theme of the digital transformation is the right theme. Everywhere we look, it is the remarkable breakthroughs of digital technologies that are propelling us in further advances and disruptions of every part of our life. You've mentioned science, education, and the arts. So let me just start there. The fact that within 1 year of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have many vaccines is unprecedented in vaccinology and due entirely to the breakthroughs of digital biotechnology, because the biotech industry was able to deploy highly sophisticated responses to a new virus that was identified for the first time on January 11th, 2020. And within a few weeks, there were already model vaccines underway. The mRNA platform vaccines of Moderna and Pfizer are examples of digital biotechnology, which enabled this remarkable advance, but also for all of the other platform vaccines the rate of development would have been impossible 10 years ago. This is a reflection of the digital age. Education has obviously also gone digital this past year. Here we are in the latest Zoom. Universities went immediately 100% online. I'm not sure about how Alma Mater operated in the past 12 months, but Columbia University went entirely online. And truth be told, I'm going to my office this afternoon, now that I am also vaccinated for the first time in 377 days. So there's a little bit of mail waiting for me, but we were able to function entirely online. I've spent the early part of today discussing advances of online education as a way for massive leapfrogging of education in Africa, because there's an opportunity and a need in Africa for a revolution in higher education. And it has to be low cost, it has to be accessible, it has to be quality. And how to do this other than with a very substantial online element. And I think we can do things in higher education that have never been done before in terms of bringing higher education to the mass of the population at very low cost quickly. So we were brainstorming on that. But I also think that we're going to find that the digital world enables revolutions in education in countless ways. Young people in primary and secondary school have digital skills that certainly exceed mine. My granddaughters, who are age 4, 6, and 8, teach me how to do things online. They're making digital presentations. They are sending in their homework assignments. They're learning foreign languages with voice messaging, and really remarkable opportunities. There are new skills that we will be able to train in using geographic information in new ways, mapping and so forth, that are all possible in an age of big data and online cloud computing and universal access to information. It's also the case that for me at Columbia University, for example, I have online access to, I don't know how many, but I would guess 50,000 journals at the touch of the click of the button. And this is global information that should be available for students everywhere. So we have an opportunity to really universalize access to knowledge, to books, to scientific information. The third category you mentioned is the arts. And it is fitting that yesterday was a world record of an auction of digital art. I'm sure people read about it, but the digital artwork every days by the artist Mike Wickelman auctioned at Christie's for $69 million yesterday, setting a record for digital art. It is comes along with an NFT, which I had never heard of before yesterday, but I'm sure most people know that it is a non-fungible token, a certificate of digital authenticity. It was purchased by Ethereum, not by US dollars, but with an equivalent market value of $69.3 million yesterday. No doubt purchased online also. So the art world is completely being transformed as well. I recently published a book called The Ages of Globalization, which tracks how the world has changed over, I was modest, I put it the last 300,000 years. It's a thin little book, but it tried to give an overview of the Paleolithic era, the Neolithic age, the age of ocean empires, the industrial age, and I call our age the digital age for all the reasons that I've been describing. All of these great transformative eras were paced by innovation. If there is a basic arrow of change of human history, and I think there is, it is knowledge. It is our capacity to deploy tools for addressing human needs, unfortunately also to deploy tools for killing each other all too often or for other kinds of conflict. But it is technological change which is the fundamental pacer of historical change, because major technologies change everything about how we live, where we live, the kinds of work that we do, the ways that our economies interact globally. And I argue in the book that the seventh great age of global interconnectedness is the digital age, that essentially it is the successor to the industrial age, which started with the invention of the steam engine back in the 1770s, actually even back to 1696, if you want to be technical about it, but really commercially from the end of the 18th century. And I trace this digital revolution, as often is the case, first to a great genius, Alan Turing, who in 1936 essentially laid out the idea that strings of zeros and ones could provide the basis for universal computation. And another great genius who came along soon afterwards, John von Neumann, built the first computers with logical circuitry based on vacuum tubes. And then with the transistor, we entered really the age of digital revolution with the capacity to build microprocessors, and then with Moore's law kicking in from the late 1950s, essentially till today, creating billions and billions fold increased capacity to compute, to store data, and to transmit data. And that's the world that we're in today. So in the ages of globalization, not only do I emphasize the role of these fundamental, or sometimes called general purpose technologies, but emphasize how disruptive they are. The steam engine created not only industrialization, it also created the European imperial domination. There were empires before, to be sure, but the British Empire was the first industrial empire. And the military advantage that came with industrialization was so complete that it led to a European, utterly dominated world that was only shaken, basically, and ended by the two European world wars. The United States became the geopolitical heir of that hegemony for a while. But I think the digital age is changing geopolitics as fundamentally as it is changing the economy in every sector, because these technologies are able to spread around the world. And most notably, East Asia has become a digital technology powerhouse alongside Western Europe and the United States. So we have three basic centers of digital endogenous economic growth now: Northeast Asia, which is China, Japan, and Korea, the European Union, and the United States. And a lot of the future of our geopolitics and the world economy will follow the rapid course of change driven by the digital age. Today, the digital age includes every kind of basic infrastructure for digital societies, which is universal connectivity, 5G, which will soon become 6G soon enough, the integration of renewable energy, of transport, of governance into these digital networks, and of course, the application of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the rapidly developing more artificial general intelligence that I think is likely to be on its way in future years. What is notable about all of this is that China is very good at this, and that is driving the United States a bit crazy right now, and it's creating the need also for Europe to rethink Europe's strategies in this area. I think it was very notable and important that Europe announced just this past week a major commitment of hundreds of billions of dollars to build Europe's own semiconductor and digital industry, which I strongly support as an initiative. Let me end by saying that within this ambit, we have work to do of global cooperation that is the only way that we can have a digital age, which is also an age of peace, social inclusion, and sustainable development. Technological transformations of this scale are often followed by conflict, and the threats of US-China confrontation are quite real, especially given I would say, the neurotic state of American foreign policy these days, which is extraordinarily preoccupied with China's successes in these areas. But the fact of the matter is the European Union, the United States, China, and other parts of the world should be working together to harness these new technologies in order to decarbonize our economies, to establish systems of sustainable land use and sustainable food systems worldwide. In other words, to achieve programs like the European Green Deal, and to accelerate the end of poverty and the other sustainable development goals, which are our global goals. So I'll end these brief remarks by saying that the digital age gives us phenomenal opportunities, tremendous disruption, and tremendous risks. And like all eras of major technological change, in the end, how we use these technologies depends on our ethical choices and our desires to use them for the good and to prevent the kind of conflict which has so often accompanied disruption in the past. Let me thank you again for a chance to make a few brief remarks, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs. We know you're in the middle of a busy day, and to quote a very famous American movie, you've got mail, although it's snail mail in your office. But do you still have time to answer three questions? Because questions are pouring in. So one question was about your take on the influence of social media on the present economy, and for example, like Elon Musk tweets. And the stock exchange are just getting mad. So how do you think that the phenomenon of social media actually influences the present and future digital economy?
I am off of Twitter for a couple of years now. I liked it at the beginning. I became addicted to it next. So every statement I made, I wanted to check how many responses came from the followers, and then I decided it was incredibly destabilizing. If I could wave a magic wand, the one thing I would like to do is get all political leaders off of Twitter. I think it is an utter disaster in this regard. We need discussion and dialogue that is more sophisticated than 140 characters. And we learned from Trump, who really was a clinical psychopath. He still is, by the way, but he's no longer president, that we cannot afford to have this kind of empty but highly addictive form of communication as a substitute for the real practice of deliberation in society. So I think that these social media are much more of a problem than a solution to anything. And not to mention the fact that we don't really know and understand what the tech giants do with our data, our information, our surveillance. It's not, it is not safe. It is not prudent. And by the way, I'm trying to remember the example. I was speaking to my daughter about something a couple of days ago. We were just having a chat, and I said something, and we were not online. We were walking. And since then, she has been getting text messages on her phone, advertisements for whatever this product was for the last 2 days. So the system was listening in automatically and responding with targeted advertisements. Fairly sickening, by the way, I would say, if I could use a strong adjective. But this is because in the US, we have no effective regulation of business because business runs our society. And these tech giants get away with anything they want to do. And they're in cahoots with the national security services to boot. So I'm not a fan. Let me put it that way.
Okay, but regulation would be a solution to this.
Europe's regulations, GDPR, is an extremely important step forward. It's a first step. It's an early step. But Europe is so much more sensitive to these issues. And for one reason also, which is that these are American tech giants. So it's easier for Europe to step back politically and regulate them. But as an American, my request to Europe is please do so, because the US government will not do so. So we need the European Union to lead the way on digital taxation and lead the way on digital regulation.
Okay, great. One remark, it's really, you've been so honest when it comes to Twitter, because now they already augmented the number of text you can now use 280.
I know.
So that's changed. My second out of 3 questions would be, what's your take on cryptocurrencies, and of course of the fact that some tech giants may issue their own money, and of course that there are also considerations, for example, in Europe, that the European Central Bank would issue a digital euro.
There are 2 extremely different issues here. One is digital currencies, which is an effective way to make transactions. So if there's a digital euro or a digital dollar, which makes actual transactions in our currencies more effective, but without giving up the ability to actually track illicit operations and tax fraud and so forth, this is a good step forward. So using the technologies for that purpose is a good step forward. This is very different, in my understanding, from cryptocurrencies. I am not a fan at all of Bitcoin, quite the contrary. Now, there are 2 parts to this. There's a smaller part and there's the bigger part. The smaller part is bad enough, which is the Bitcoin mining is an unbelievable waste of resources and a highly polluting waste of resources. It's a massive amount of power being used, a lot of CO2 emissions resulting from that, for nothing of social value that I can see. Bitcoin is not a store of value, and it is not a medium of exchange. Now, the second point for me is a bigger one. Bitcoin has bootstrapped to $1 trillion of market capitalization. I regard that as almost like returns to counterfeiting, which is, where did that value come from? It came from all of us who hold euros and dollars and other financial assets, somehow because somebody, we don't even know, declared that something that has no value has value. And because of the fact that in financial markets there can be bubbles that give value in terms of exchangeability to dollars or euros out of thin air, basically, it is the case that Bitcoins now have a tradable value of $1 trillion that buys the goods that can compete for the same goods that you or I, with our bank accounts in dollars or euros, have also compete with. Now, if someone was just printing euros, you would object. You would say, that's, first of all, that's illegal, that's counterfeiting. Second, that is taking away basically social value, which is, we call it seigniorage, that the European Central Bank earns and that should share with the citizenry of the Eurozone. And I feel the same way about the Bitcoin, which is, I wish our central banks had said from the beginning, no, thank you, because you don't get to print money. You don't get to issue a substitute currency. And the justification that it's creating an innovation, to my mind, does not apply, because I see no value in this cryptocurrency other than possibly for tax evasion or for illicit purchases. I see no technical advantages compared to a digital euro or a digital dollar. So the long and the short of it, I am not a fan that basically this kind of value I regard as not social value, but as value that has come out of, at the cost of the holders of traditional currencies.
Great, Professor Sachs. One more question by Jasmina Kuzmanovic, who is a journalist of the Bloomberg Network in Zagreb, because you know our region so well, Central and Eastern Europe. How do you see the response or the dealing of these countries with the COVID-19 crisis? Because there are some problems, or big problems, in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, and other countries, including Slovenia too.
I think the truth is, and it's a big and sad puzzle for us, I call it the North Atlantic region, the US and Canada on our side and the European Union on the other side of the Atlantic. We have failed badly in COVID-19, almost without exception, by the way. And it's a bit of a mystery how bad we have failed. In the sense, I mean, why we have failed so badly, I should put it more accurately. I have watched every day this pandemic from really from the start a year ago. And what has been true for the entire year is that the Asia Pacific countries, and in that region, I would include China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, at least. So basically, most of ASEAN, most of Northeast Asia, and Australia, New Zealand have had death rates roughly 100th of what we have had in our part of the world. And we should draw lessons from that. And we should understand this. We have failed compared to the other side of the globe. And we don't make that comparison because we compare ourselves to our neighbors who also failed. And so the truth is something went haywire in our basic public health and our societal responses. And I think it's partly top down and partly bottom up. In the United States, it's not too hard to figure out. We had Donald Trump as president. He was complete disaster, the worst president in American history, at least since 1857, possibly for all time, but an absolute mentally disordered individual. So he didn't care and he didn't try. But Europe has a lot better leaders, and somehow it failed badly in Europe in control also. The public was not great. The public did not want to understand, did not really want to lock down when necessary, to take precautions, to call for strong measures. My wife is from Prague, and so we obviously followed the developments in the Czech Republic very, very closely. And the Czech Republic locked down last spring quite hard, and the cases came way down. And then they celebrated with a public celebration on Karlovy Most, Charles Bridge, thousands of people coming out in a super spreader, disastrous event. And they never got the epidemic back under control. So you just look at that, and it was predictably a tragedy that day. When we heard about it, we were completely shocked. And it was predictable that a disaster would ensue. And the government never tried again, even to take coherent measures. So I'm unfortunately don't have much nice to say about this. I think the European Union really needs a deep dive into what happened, and a frank one. Of course, the first thing to do is to end this pandemic still, and that means taking the measures that are needed, of as much isolation as needed to bring these cases way down. Of course, the vaccine issue has been a mess for a lot of reasons, and still remains a problem. But the combination of public health measures and vaccines are vital, but public responsibility is essential. And then we really need to reflect on all of this, because we need to improve our governance. Science-based, rational, deliberative, aiming for clear objectives. We have not done a good job. And we're going to have to draw lessons from that so that we can do the kind of real governance that we need for the hard issues ahead, whether it's the digital or the climate change or the rest of the Green Deal. Those are difficult, challenging, complex issues, and we've got to do a much better job than we did during the first year of the COVID pandemic.
So that was a perfect conclusion, Professor Sachs. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts. It's been, I wouldn't say a revelation, because you said a lot of things we heard, but in a way which of course very encouraging and inspiring. Thank you so much. Take care.
Pleasure to be with you, and a great honor.
See you hopefully in Slovenia soon.
I'm counting on it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Us too. Thank you, and a good day to New York. So, before we start with our discussion with the panelists, already announced by Professor Toplak, I have the honor to announce also a very special address by Mr. Andrej Šircelj, the Minister of Finance in the government of the Republic of Slovenia, and after that we'll go on with discussion with our guests. So stay tuned.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you at today's conference. I'd also like to thank the organizers for the invitation and an opportunity to address all of you tonight. The current times are turbulent and challenging, but today we will remember the events from 30 years ago, when the Slovenian independence was followed by the entrance to the monetary sovereignty and glimpse at the digital future. This year, the new reality continues. The COVID-19 pandemic changed our lives and the way we do business. Slovenia reacted quickly and efficiently. Up to now, we adopted 8 anti-corona packages and protected jobs and companies. The vaccine means good news. We are approaching the light at the end of the tunnel. Despite the aftermath of the pandemic, we must focus on the new opportunities, especially those related to digitalization. The digital technologies are becoming omnipresent and are changing our lives in many ways. Today, these technologies allow us to have a virtual discussion. There are pros and cons to digitalization, but it is a fact that cannot be ignored. It is a tool for establishing and maintaining connections, not only when it comes to personal relationships, but also in the field of economy and finance. To ensure competitiveness and development, we need to prioritize the digital transition. This is true for the financial and the wider economic sector. When it comes to statehood, the monetary sovereignty is an important element of it. National currencies express identity in a similar manner to national flags and anthems. At the Declaration of Independence, Slovenia strove towards achieving the monetary sovereignty. Developing the model of the monetary sovereignty was not an easy task. Hence, special acknowledgement goes to those who participated at it. You succeeded. On the 8th of October 1991, Slovenia introduced its own money. That was the Slovenian tolar, the only legitimate means of payment in Slovenia. But the challenges continued. When Slovenia introduced its own currency, it had no foreign exchange reserves and was also burdened by 22% monthly inflation. Due to the foreign trade surplus and subsequent capital inflows, we were able to accumulate significant foreign exchange reserves and reduce inflation. In 1995, the Slovenian tolar officially became a convertible currency. By becoming a part of the European Union, Slovenia committed to introduce the euro. Even though this was a part of accession treaty, we first had to fulfill the convergence criteria. This was our key goal in the area of the economic and monetary policy. Slovenia succeeded again. We introduced the euro on the 1st of January 2007. The first decade of the euro was marked by the issuance of commemorative coin for 2 euros with the central motif of 10 swallows in flight. Each of the swallows represents one spring since the introduction of the euro, while the bird symbolizes freedom. The introduction of the euro has advantages for the consumers as well. It improves price transparency and the chance of comparison to other member states that use the euro. In Slovenia, the advantages of adopting the euro showed in lower interest rates, elimination of rate exchange costs and currency risks, better integration of financial markets, easier access to capital and improved international cooperation. This positively influenced the international competitiveness of Slovenia and the level of investments. But today, the euro faces new challenges. Digitalization is changing the classic means of payment, which incited discussions about the possible introduction of digital euro. It would be issued by the European Central Bank and national central banks and available to all citizens and businesses. A digital euro would therefore combine the efficiency of the digital payment instrument and the security of the central bank money. So, yes, there are challenges ahead, but if the last year taught us anything, it taught us that we can conquer them by working together. The global community is founded on thriving diversity, yet it is also based on strong values and common denominators that provide the common ground and reduce differences between nations. Hence, allow me to conclude with a proposal. I suggest that we focus on the power and strength that lie in unity and provide a prosperous future. Thank you for your attention. I wish you all the best and stay healthy.
So that was Mr. Šircelj, the Slovenian Minister of Finance. And now we go on with our panel discussion when it comes to sustainable development and digital transformation. I would ask Dr. Pleskovič for your thoughts on the very topic. So experience 30 years ago when it comes to new challenges.
Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very happy to say hello to everybody. 30 years ago, I took a leave of absence from the World Bank for 2 years to help Slovenia with independence. And in my short talk, I will say something about how important is our diaspora. 500,000 Slovenians who live abroad. Many of them are excellent scientists, excellent doctors, excellent experts in business and so on. And many of them, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
And many of them returned at that time when we were building independence. For example, Joseph Bernig was the Consul General of Abbott and Abbott, had a doctorate in law and economics. He helped us in Prime Minister Peterle. Marko Kremžar was president of Slovenian community of 35,000 people, prominent economist Argentina. And then Jeffery Sachs came to visit Slovenia because he was advising Russia and Poland. And we invited him together with Prime Minister Peterle to help us with transition. And he had 7 prominent Harvard graduates, all with PhD, who helped us. And they were financed by United Nations Development Program. And one day, Jeffery Sachs said, we need to write legislation for transition. All the market economy law of central bank, law of commercial bank, law of bankruptcy, go to the dean of the law school and ask him if their young professors can help us with that. I went to the dean of the law school and he said, Mr. Pleskovič, we don't know anything about market economy. We know self-management economy and centralized type socialist economy. So then my group had to sit down and we wrote 74 laws that have to be done. We also engaged White and Case in New York, who had experience with transition, and we wrote those laws. And at Harvard later, Jeffery Sachs said they couldn't believe that in one meeting of 3 hours, we wrote all the 74 laws that you need to have a market economy if you have a new country. So we did well on that. Then I would also like to say, then Jeffery Sachs and I wrote a chapter for Chicago University Press, Transition in East Europe, Political Independence and Economic Sovereignty in Slovenia. I was already returned to Washington, and I wanted to send him the first draft of the chapter. And Jeff said, well, now I heard that from our computer department that you can send this by email. I tried, we were on the phone for 1 hour and a half, it didn't work. 2 months later, it worked. But today, you can talk on Zoom, you can, like Jeff said, digital economy is common and it's advancing. And when I was teaching at MIT for 2 years, across my office was the office of Media Lab, the computer lab, one of the most advanced labs in America. And my secretary said, go there and see what they have just discovered. And the head of that lab showed me a small disk, and he said, can you imagine, yesterday we succeeded to put the whole Encyclopedia Britannica on this disk. But now what you can do with the 5G in telecommuting is unbelievable. I will say a few words how much Slovenians who had at the beginning, many of them wrote letters and telegrams to help Slovenian independence, can help us in the future, and how much they do. At the Slovenian World Congress, we organized 35 conferences, 10 of medical doctors from Slovenia around the world, 10 of scientists, 5 of architects and engineers, 3 of lawyers, and your colleague, Mr. Bobonik, once I went on TV to say what we do at the Slovenian World Congress, he said, what's that useful for? You meet, you have some coffee, you talk, and maybe you have a cocktail. Then I gave him a few examples. Mr. Bregan, I said, at our first conference of medical doctors came a doctor from Australia. She said, I was reluctant to come because I had to pay my own ticket. You are civil society, have little money. I am very happy I came. She discovered how to make artificial skin when there are burns in a fire. And she has a patent on that. She said, now I worked for 10 years for free with the clinical center, University Center of Slovenia. Mm-hmm. Then our diaspora from around the world helped us to open a medical faculty and architecture faculty in Maribor, because before we are a small country of 2 million people, had only one faculty of medicine, one faculty of architecture, and those people wanted to keep the monopoly. There is many other things. Somebody, a prominent medical doctor came from Argentina, Mr. Lipovšek, and he said, in Slovenia and Ljubljana Clinical Center, you don't have child surgery. You have only general surgery. I want to have a department for children's surgery. Mm-hmm. And people resisted. At the end, now we have, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
At the end, he was very stubborn, and there is a children's surgery in Maribor approved by the European Commission, because before they said that it doesn't matter if you do surgery on an 80-year-old or a 3-year-old on a heart or if a broken leg, it's not true. So a lot of these people help Slovenia, and many of them can help more. And I would like to praise Mr. Toplak to start this conference. There was 1 month ago, there was another conference by Bogdan Šali from Brazil,
Sao Paulo,
who organized all our prominent businessmen with a huge industrialist from around the world, from Australia, Canada, America, to connect them together. And in the future, we will have more of these video lectures. We will have more chance to share the knowledge. And the final thing I want to say is Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, was my boss. And he said, Boris, there is a lot of problems in America, but we still have the best education system, universities in the world. We make more money, billions of dollars from foreign students than from tourism. And America attracted the best and the brightest minds. But what China has done, sent more than 1 million students to America. Many of them became professors, but also got back more than 1 million of those students. And what I want Slovenia to attract, we have about 18,000 students in Europe and America and around the world a year, young people. More than 50% of them want to come back. We need to attract them back to make Slovenia better and more advanced country. That's what China has done with their scientists, and now they are a serious competitor of US, and US is worried about that.
So it's good to know that we have this potential, but I'm coming to Dr. Arhar. So I mean, your wisdom, your take on what happened 30 years ago, which can be used also while facing new digital challenges.
Mr. Sachs stressed many things related to current situation, let me say, in United States as well around the world. He stressed also that the advantage of Europe is regulation. But here, in this field of the activities, I have a bit different approach to this regulation. Yes, of course, on one side, we have on the paper the same status for all countries, but in practice, pretty different one. For instance, if we start with introduction of euro in 99, in accordance to Maastricht Treaty, it was stated clear which are preconditions for participation in new European currency. And it was stated that 3 countries didn't fulfill Maastricht criteria. Among those, especially Italy and Belgium, as well Greece. Despite this fact, last 2 countries, especially Italy and Belgium, joined initial group immediately. That means they didn't fulfill especially criteria related to the level of public debt. And here, in this field of the activities, especially public debt, in addition, in the latest time, in the last year, I have some fears how will be in the future, on one side with fiscal policy and on the other side with monetary one. This is one case. The other one, please, regulation versus Brexit. In 2012, European Commission asked Mr. Liikanen, who was governor in Finland, to analyze which was a key reason for last financial crisis. He prepared a report in October 2012, in accordance to which one he proposed banking structural reform. How to understand banking structural reform? He suggested to split huge banks to 2 entities. And what's happened till now? Nothing. This reform was not realized. Why? Because big institutions as Deutsche Bank and the other have been against. That means it was decided on the paper, in the practice, nothing. And last one, which is also very important, let me say, for our country, as we have been also faced with this financial crisis. In Frankfurt was set up banking supervision in November 2014. And after first year, this banking supervision stated what's a difference in daily banking business. For instance, what is very important, regarding delay by debtor, they stated that it's has definition in Italy by 180 days, similar in France and once again in Great Britain. In our country, by 90 days. Then they stated that the banks have 7,000 different models for assessing of the risk. And in addition, that countries used 150 competencies to regulate in own country domestic situation. With the other words, very frankly speaking, I have some fears related to the future development in Euro area, because current situation connected with the debt, connected with the development, as well connected with political issues. Don't forget it, one political party in Germany has in own program to introduce again Deutschmark. And the situation between North and South has additional problem. And one last statement vis-a-vis digitalization and digital currency. Don't forget it following. The first economy in Europe, the most important one, Germany, transactions in Germany organized in banknotes are by 70% of all transactions. A lower level is in Austria. That means banknotes have still a very important influence on all transactions, as well vis-a-vis trust, which is connected with the central bank. Because we know central bank is producing fiat, let me say, fiat money. So that this process will be not easy, in my opinion. Maybe will be step by step, but what will be on the end of this story is difficult to say, especially in addition, because a cybercrime is from day to day higher. And this is additional risk for all participants. So much at the time being. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Arhar. Now we go on to Dr. Festić. As I said, professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics of the University of Maribor. You have a lot of experience with the Slovenian Central Bank. You're also a scholar. So if you combined all your knowledge and of course experience you have, how do you see, let's say, the future of this sustainability? What Mr. Arhar was also speaking of. There are so many definitions about of sustainability also in this financial and broader economic sense. What are your thoughts, especially on future?
Thank you for your question. First, I would like to expose in brief words the difference between the COVID pandemic crisis and the financial crisis that started in 2008. I have to say, we have to admit that the Euro crisis that started in 2007 was different from this crisis now. For example, from the point of view of the Slovenia, we imported the global financial crisis after 2008, and the leverage ratio of enterprises was very high because in this time period, the privatization process was in process. Indebtedness of households was low, and practically it was impossible to avoid the crisis after 2008. And from the point of view what happened in Europe from 2010 to 2015, we have to expose the growing asymmetries induced by unsustainable borrowing sprees during 2000 and 2008 in all the Europe, founded mostly by Germany, France, and other car countries. And this crisis induced painful internal adjustments and a sharp growth contraction, especially in some countries like Greece, Italy, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain. at that times when Germany and other countries mostly sustained positive and robust growth. Now, the difference between the COVID crisis, we have to say that in order to fight these economic consequences of pandemic crisis, monetary and fiscal policy announced a large variety of support packages. And what we have to stress is the fact that the good news is, in this crisis, last crisis, that banks are generally more resilient than they were before 2008, because the financial crisis has different reasons than this crisis now. We have to say that before lockdown started, we have very high economic growth in all European countries, also in Slovenia. And the banks are in a good condition. Liquidity ratio is high, capital adequacy is good. And because the banks have greater capital and liquidity cushions, we have to find a way how to live in these new conditions of the world global economy. This means that risks to financial stability are stemming from the banking sector are now much lower, despite the declining share prices of the banks, because the sharp decline in interest rates, combined with growing anxiety about the economic outlook, have also raised investors' concerns about the health of banks. But banks are in a good condition, and bank share prices have fallen sharply, and the bond prices of banks have also come under some pressure, likely reflecting a fear of potential losses. But the economic forecasts for Europe are positive also for this year, and especially for the next year. And how do I see the future? Policymakers must act decisively and cooperate at the global level to preserve monetary and financial stability during this time of extraordinary challenges. What I want to say is that there is a need also in the future to synchronize actions across the countries and synchronize the actions between fiscal and monetary policy, and to increase the power of this cooperation. But the mantra of hoping for the best and preparing for the worst has long been successfully deployed. And what is the challenge for the future is, from my point of view, how to step out of these non-standard monetary policy instruments, and what would be the consequences of stepping out gradually from non-standard monetary policy approach. This is the challenge for the future.
Thank you very much, Professor Festić. Before I conclude this first round with Mr. Peterle, who is a model policymaker, I would like to challenge Professor Hewick in Canada, because you split your activities and experience between academia and business, especially family business. So what could you say about your view on how we should treat sustainability and sustainable development through the prisma of digital transformation we're in and we will also face in the years to come?
Well, thank you. Hope my mic is on. First of all, warm greetings from Canada. I want to go back a little bit. This conference is supposed to be about two things: people and the digital economy. And when I heard about it, I had to ask myself three questions. One, how did we get to this digital age? Mm-hmm. Two, what economic engines helped drive us here? And then three, we should be looking at, well, what are the challenges for those engines? And the answer to the first of our questions, how did we get here? Jeffery Sachs mentioned his book last year, The Ages of Globalization. He does a wonderful job of telling us how we got here through 7 ages. And what's remarkable, if we look at those 7 ages, and it's kind of scary, is that it's taken us 100,000 years to get down to digital. But when we look at that time frame, we went from 60,000 years in the first age to 6,000 to 3,000 to 2,000 to 260, and then the industrial age, we're down to another 200 years. But within that industrial age, mechanization only lasted 140. Automation was followed next at 60. Then we went to the computer age, 40 years, and now we're into the digital, and we're into it 20 years, and folks are already talking that we're coming out of it. What I also thank Dr. Sachs for saying is that each one of those has presented a major disruption. And we are at a major disruption today around the world, both economically, socially, and with our environment. So the second question I asked was, how did we get here? And I looked to our philosophers and our thinkers out there, and William O'Hara comes big in my mind. He says, before the multinational, there was family business. Before the Industrial Revolution, there were family businesses. Before the Enlightenment, before the empires of Rome. In fact, if we go right back to Dr. Sachs's 100,000 years of development, family businesses have been the true drivers. Now, a lot of you may say, well, wait a minute, families, we know how big business operates. That's the multinationals. We know how many large firms we have out there. But when we look at the data, as I know Dr. Sachs loves to do, Europe alone, 60% of all your businesses are family businesses. That's about 14 million businesses. 40 to 50% of all your private sector employment is family business. Equates to about 60 million jobs. And if we look at how much those family businesses are producing, it's about 45 to 55% of European GDP. And my friends in Slovenia will sit there and say, yeah, but not in Slovenia. Au contraire, my friends. 82% of all your businesses are family businesses, and they're not the little mom and pop operations. The average revenue in Slovenia from family businesses is about 4.2 million euros per year. Most of them, because you're just 30 years in operation as a market economy, are still in that first and second phase. So we go to this little engine that's driving your economy, and I wish people would pay more attention to it. And we do surveys quite regularly. The most recent is by Ernst & Young, and we said to these family businesses that drive your economy, what's your single biggest problem? And you know what it is today? Digitalization. And that's just not going digital. That means finding the business case that will work in today's economy. In the last 20 years, that will work. How do we find out what the needs of people are? How do we market to these people? How do we set up a financial model such that we can compete and make a profit and be sustainable? So we go in and we say, well, okay, you've got digitalization, making that business case. And by the way, in the first part of the Industrial Revolution, that business cycle lasted 25 to 35 years. By the time we got to the computer age, it was 15 to 20. In the digital age, it's 2 to 5 years. And if you don't successfully adopt the new models and make it work, then you're out of business. So we went to the people and we said to them, the family businesses, what's the biggest problem within digitalization? And they said, number one, far above everything else, is that we don't have the expertise. We lack training and upgrading. And as Jeffrey mentioned, that training and upgrading in the digital space is not necessarily in Europe, nor in the United States. It's in Asia. And we've got to bridge that gap and be able to reach out. Because when I see you don't have expertise, you don't have training, that's opportunity. To me as a businessman or me as an academic administrator, that says we've got to get people in here to train, to bring that expertise in. And I'm not sure we're going to find it in Europe. We're not that more likely to find it in America. Go east, go to Asia. And Jeffrey very nicely covered that they're so far ahead of us, even into 6G now, that we need to reach out and bring those people in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hewick. And last but not least, I announced already Mr. Alojz Peterle, the first Prime Minister of independent Slovenia. You as a policymaker, because a lot will also depend on how future policymakers would react to this challenge and provide a sustainable, let's say, political environment for this sustainable transformation in digital. Well, how do you see the prospects of this policy making in the future age?
Thank you very much. I would like to say, first of all, that I'm pleased to see so many my former collaborators in the team which was responsible for change in Slovenia at work today, sharing very, very important ideas. And I would add to Professor Sachs, Dr. Arhar, Dr. Pleskovič, also Rector Toplak, because he was my chief 30 years ago, because I was member of the Slovenian parliament and he was chief of the political chamber. So this is why he was my chief. Thank you for your share at that time as well. Now, I would say that I see a big difference between 1990, 91 and today. At that time, we had clear diagnosis, we had clear objectives, we had enough courage, good collaborators, and as Professor Sachs said, we succeeded. And then we joined the European Union with very clear idea that if we do that and that, we will join the better part of the world. Of course, I like to say that enlargement of the European Union does not mean yet truly united Europe. These are two different terms. And we see what is happening after Brexit. And there is a new fact, I have to mention that I think for the first time, a political party left European People's Party. I don't like to speak about Viktor Orban now, but this is very interesting political fact, which shows that the situation in Europe is not that simple. And there is, I would say 30 years ago, there was quite strong certainty. I mentioned, if we do that and that, we will get in better position. But now we are not facing only different crises, but uncertainty. And small virus is, I don't like to enter the question of vaccines, immunity, and so on. And I'm pleased that health is becoming a key word in the speeches of the political leaders. But I think that health as a slogan is not enough. It is not enough to have health in the first sentence of the political speeches. I think it's time to rethink the paradigm, the concept of development. And this, I was pleased by Professor Sachs' words that we have to rethink European Union, which is also important for the future of United States. And I think we have to reconsider many things. Also, digitalization itself We spoke today what we can do with it in different areas of life. But I think we should speak also what we cannot achieve with digitalization. We cannot digitalize our hearts, our souls, our joy for life. There are other points I could share, but I'm pleased that we share the main idea that digitalization is a tool. It's not a value on its own, I would say. No. So, and then is also global aspect of the story or of our today's conversation. I think there are two main alternatives: whether we will end in conflict or series of conflicts. I don't like to speak about the wars we had to face or we still have to face in our vicinity. So whether conflict or cooperation, and we see that the virus, the invisible virus, did not contribute only to the solidarity. It also showed different egoisms, I would say. And I think that we have also to rethink the concept of sustainability. And Europe can be very green, very united in this, in green terms, but we cannot keep globe green with only one continent green. So this is why I'm pleased that the United States decided to join the club again. So I think there are many terms to rethink, and sustainability is one of them. We have to reconsider the words which are frequently used, especially in the European Union, that man has to be at center of our attention. What does it mean today to have man or to see man at the center? I think it was maybe much more clear 30 years ago when Europe was still divided. No? So these are some ideas I intended to share with you, and I'm pleased that Alma Mater Europaea in Maribor is showing this interest to consider our questions, political, economic, and other questions with the accent of the man. This, I think, is the only reasonable, I would say, way to do it. So again, thank you for the invitation. And I didn't think that I will share my views with my former 3 main collaborators. Thank you.
And you still are, Mr. Peterle, and you build a perfect bridge to our next round of probably last round of thoughts. Well, the challenges are immense. You said that probably the paradigm of sustainability should be rethought because there are so many complex problems we're facing, like health crisis and especially the climate crisis. What do you think? And I start hereby with Mr. Pleskovič again, who left the computer. But let me start this last round with Mr. Pleskovič. What do you think the impact of the COVID-19 crisis will be when it comes to redefining, rethinking our future development? So this trauma of this generation of facing a pandemic, how will this influence our way of thinking and our way of addressing the challenges we speak today?
What I want to say that there is one proverb which says that a crisis is also a challenge, an opportunity to improve things, to do them better. In this, when I watched Star Wars movies and I saw somebody from a spaceship talking to his wife on the Earth, I said that's not possible. Maybe this is a fantastic stuff. Today we can connect. The opportunity that this crisis of COVID gives us is we should improve our health around the world. We should take better care of our parents, grandparents, of older people, their health and conditions. But it also gives an opportunity, what I said before, 25 years ago, you couldn't send an email, a paper to your co-author to change it and send it back to you. Now, 10 years ago, Sachs said the fact that we have email, that we have computers that they can transfer knowledge means that a 5-year-old child has more information on computer than what used to be Alexandria Library. So there is more knowledge, there is more chance to collect. For example, Slovenian World Congress now has several video lectures of our prominent scientists from US, England, and so on. And it will connect us better. It will connect not just our diaspora. European Union has a special department how to attract more scientists from America back to France, to Germany, to their countries. So today, when we have 10th conference of doctors, at the beginning they were reluctant to meet. Now we have excellent doctors at home and abroad. Now when there is a problem to save a life of a patient, which is very complicated, our Slovenian doctors call Slovenian in a Swiss hospital, in a Canadian hospital, in American hospital. But now those doctors can also show on the video how they can assist the surgery and so on. So this connectivity will bring us more together. That's one thing that I would like to emphasize.
Dr. Arhar, your thoughts on how the present COVID health crisis can trigger our initiatives and our let's say inspiration to face all other even bigger crises like the climate crisis and of course a possible economic crisis or financial crisis you were talking about in your first part.
Okay, thank you very much once again for your question. First of all, I wish to stress that I fully agree with statement made by Mr. Peterle related to digitalization, generally speaking. On the other side, if I compare two crises, on one side financial one and current one, COVID one. For the last one is for me a key question. How long will still last current crisis? Because for financial one, we knew what should be done. Also for current one, but not by guarantee. So that for me is here the first question. The second one related also to Dr. Mejra Festić. Which are my fears related to European monetary policy? Which will be exit from current model of monetary policy? Because current budget, generally speaking, around the world, it's mainly financed by printing of new fresh money. And we know we haven't in Europe fiscal union. We haven't yet banking union, despite the fact that it was stressed what is needed. But we know that related to banking union, still we have a problem in Germany. On the other side, please, we know Mr. Draghi was president of ECB. Last week, he has had a speech in front of Italian parliament. And he stressed, among the other things, that he's expecting that Europe will have different treatments related to some members of European Union. Yes, of course, I know why, and we know why. I stress due to very high public debt and so on. And if we compare, for instance, in this field of public debt around the world, we can state that the growth of public debt around the world was very high in last year, so that reached on the end of last year 98% of world GDP. So that from this point of view, I am expecting very interesting discussion on future of Europe. You know that European Commission is preparing this type of discussion. And here we will state which are the proposals on the paper, which will be in reality, in the practice, we will see. So that also from this point of view, it should be one day a totally new situation, statement that it is impossible to survive with common currency. Slovenian experience with own currency, it's a very positive one. And European Monetary Union, if will be more or less for the same members with the same practice, can survive. Vice versa, if will be very different one for different members, will be very difficult one. Only one additional and last fact, for instance, let me say, France, it's the second biggest economy in European Union. And if we look at the time being, current figures, you can state that corporate debt in France, it's on the highest level around the world by 167% of GDP. France public debt over 100% of GDP. So that, look, if the second pillar of European Union is in such position, it's difficult to expect, in my opinion, a common approach to future practice. And from this point of view, it's also the highest risk vis-à-vis common Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arhar. Well, you gave us a lot of food for thought, and of course, it's need to be considered also when we speak about the future. Professor Festić, your take on how the current situation, which is new for so many generations who never faced war or famine or something like that. How do you think that this could actually change the approach we're actually looking for address all these challenges, even bigger challenges than the current health crisis?
Thank you for this question. All authorities should also be alert to possible financial stability threats from outside the banking system. And this is the challenge now. And this requires an increased focus on asset managers and exchange-traded funds, where investors might liquidate a risky investment suddenly. And what we have learned from the financial crisis that started in 2007, we provided a clear lesson about the risks of delaying policy action at time of perils, triggering self-fulfilling dynamics and inducing bad equilibria associated with sales, defaults, financial meltdown. And I agree with the opinion of Dr. Arhar completely. I support this approach. So this is the challenge for the future. What will be the function of the central banks? What will be the function of money? And what is the perspective of the Eurozone? Because looming threats of this accelerated pandemic crisis put frightening the medical and economic risks. And I think this is at the top of the challenge now. And of course, this has consequences on the real sector. And if the real sector is not healthy, then this is transmitted to the banks.
Okay, Dr. Hewick, in Canada, your thoughts on our future regarding it from the perspective of the current crisis, COVID-19 crisis?
Well, I agree. Yes, the COVID is now, but I think we have a bigger challenge than the medical challenge. We have major disruptions occurring because of the digital age. They affect us economically, they affect us socially, they affected us in our environment. And I think if we want to really work towards sustainable development, the best thing I can think of is to go back to our keynote speaker, to Dr. Sachs, and the conclusion that he has reached is, and I will quote this because I think it's very important. He says, our greatest hope, regardless of what the crisis is that we use the lessons of history and our common human nature to forge a new era of cooperation. And that cooperation must be at a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hewick. And then last word goes to Mr. Peterle. Well, with your experience in politics, you spoke about let's say the impact of the present COVID crisis, but how do you see the future? How will this crisis actually impact our democracies and the way actually we so think for the good of the people, which is let's say the ultimate goal of democracy, that our lives will get better and that our rights will get bigger and that human rights will be even more protected than now?
I think the virus caused also, I would say, rethinking as far as freedom is concerned. And I attended another Zoom call a few months ago where the question was what might be the consequence of the virus to democracies. And one philosopher, Mr. Galvadi from India said, it can lead to more hatred. And this is the fact. We have many very politically polarized countries, not only in Europe. There is no need to speak about United States. We didn't have such a situation 30 years ago. And now, as you may know, we are, so in May, the new conference on future of Europe will start. And we will have only one year to discuss very sensitive points. And I share concerns expressed by Dr. Arhar with regard to monetary, let's say, monetary aspect. I do ask myself whether we can have fiscal union with different fiscal cultures. You know what I'm talking about. And as far as money is concerned, we remember from our own experience in the former state Yugoslavia what printing of money could mean. No? Now, you know, some member states or some political thinkers mean that the main problem of the European Union is the voting system, and they would they wish to have more simple voting for, or majoritarian voting for many areas, foreign policy, for example, no? But this could lead also to the simplifications which would not be in line with the dignity of the smaller states and also of their interests. So I think we will have very interesting debate about the future of Europe, and we have also to agree which are those values we really share. I see the gap between the West and the Central Europe, I mean the former communist countries in Central Europe, and this difference is not related to some political leaders as Kaczynski and Orban. I think that we think in different ways when we speak about identity, culture, politics, and solidarity, and so on. So I think that we will have to address basic issues in this conference if we really wish to continue with European projects. Of course, we decided to join it in order to have our own say in it and to shape it with our share. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Peterle, and thank you.
Mr. Bergant.
Yes.
Mr. Bergant, excuse me. Can I add only one statement?
No problem, please. Mr. Arhar.
And this will be in Slovene language. Because it's very important for any crisis, for any deal, for any daily activities. And I'm repeating Sophocles from Antigona. Mm-hmm. You know that Sophocles wrote this work 472 years before Jesus Christ. And here are two persons, Creon and Antigona. Creon is king of Thebe. Mm-hmm. And Creon said vis-a-vis Antigona, najhujše zlo na svetu je denar. Ugonobil nam je številna mesta. Može pognal nam je v tujino. Pamet zmeša, srce spridi, ljudi iz ravnih potov usmerja na kriva, da tam počnejo dejanja bogokletna. Povejte, če je na to temo kaj novega, ko pišemo 2021. Po mojem mnenju čist nič. Hvala vam, oprostite.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Arhar. Well, it's quite difficult to translate Sophocles from Old Greek to Slovenian, then back to English. But actually, the first sentence of King Creon is, of course, the highest evil of everything is money, and etc. And it was written so many years ago, and it's still quite modern today. But we know the story, and what we don't know is how our story will end regarding the future. So thank you very much for your contribution, Dr. Arhar, Dr. Pleskovič, Professor Hewick, Professor Festić, and Mr. Peterle in this discussion. Hopefully it was inspiring for our listeners also for their future thoughts about how to solve these complex problems we face now and will face also in the future. And the last word of tonight goes, of course, to Professor Ludvik Toplak, the president of Alma Mater Europaea European Center, Maribor. So what are your final words for today? It's the end of a very long day of the conference. 7 days will follow. So what are your conclusions of today's participants and, of course, of today's ideas?
Yeah, thank you very much. Dear friends, dear colleagues, thank you for your contributions today. Alma Mater is organizing this conference today. There have been in the morning over 2,000 participants from 40 foreign countries. And we are continuing the whole next week until next Saturday with the panels and with the conferences from different topics, health, environment, AT technologies and communication technologies, and archives, and as well humanities. Thank you very much. I wish you a nice weekend to everybody, and you are welcome to join us according to your personal interests and abilities next week.
So thank you, Professor Toplak, for your final words. But I have to add, because I found we're all digitalized. The original quote of Sophocles' Antigone, what Mr. Arhar also mentioned in Slovenian. So the correct quote in English is, "There's nothing in the world so demoralizing as money," etc. But there is another quote in Antigone, which is, how to say, could be a fil rouge of this science congress. "A man, thou wise, should never be ashamed of learning more, and mustn't bend his mind." So we're here to learn. Thank you very much for your lessons, ladies and gentlemen, for today. And enjoy your lessons tomorrow and the week to come in the 9th Science Conference of Alma Mater Europaea. Thank you and goodbye.